The other day, I was scrolling through YouTube when a short about Shin Godzilla appeared. The video immediately caught my attention because it showed just how grotesque and terrifying this version of cinema's most famous kaiju can be. So I decided to watch the entire movie, and, to my surprise, ended up discovering what, in my opinion, is one of the most interesting concepts the character has ever had. It is worth pointing out that I have never been much of a fan of Godzilla movies. For that same reason, until now, I had not covered the character or his different versions in much depth on the channel. However, the idea of a creature that constantly evolves, modifying its body to adapt to anything that tries to destroy it, seemed so fascinating to me that it ultimately inspired me to make this video. The thing is, Shin Godzilla is not simply another version of the King of the Monsters. He is not an alpha predator that protects the natural balance, nor is he a prehistoric animal that awakens fully formed, much less a creature that destroys cities out of hatred for humanity, as other versions portray him. In this movie, Godzilla is an incomplete organism that modifies its own body as it moves forward. Every new environment forces him to evolve, and every attack that manages to injure him causes him to adapt so that he can defend himself. For this reason, what is truly terrifying about this creature is not the power he demonstrates during the movie, but everything he could still become. It is worth clarifying that, at the end of the story, the humans manage to immobilize him, but not kill him. While his body remains frozen in the middle of Tokyo, something much smaller and humanoid attempts to separate itself from his tail. That final image transforms an apparently definitive victory into a warning that Godzilla's evolution had not yet ended and had merely been interrupted. It also leaves the door open for a possible sequel. Now, while searching online, I noticed that numerous theories, deleted scenes, and even a supposed sequence of 8 forms that would eventually turn Godzilla into an omnipotent entity have spread around this creature. Therefore, to understand what Shin Godzilla could truly have become, we must first reconstruct his origin, analyze each of his transformations, and carefully separate what appears in the movie from the discarded material and everything that was later invented by fans. Released in 2016, Shin Godzilla marked the return of a Japanese production featuring the character after 12 years. Hideaki Anno wrote the screenplay and served as chief director, while Shinji Higuchi handled the direction and special effects. Both took the essence of the original 1954 movie and adapted it to the fears of a much more modern Japan. If the first Godzilla was born from the trauma caused by nuclear weapons, this new incarnation clearly reflects the earthquake, tsunami, and Fukushima nuclear disaster that occurred in 2011. For this reason, the creature simultaneously functions as a flood, an out-of-control reactor, and a mobile source of contamination. Even the numerous government meetings serve an important purpose. While officials change rooms, request authorization, and discuss which departments should act, the organism in front of them changes form in a matter of minutes. The bureaucracy attempts to classify a crisis that is evolving faster than its ability to understand it. Even the title helps establish this idea. The word Shin was deliberately written in a way that allows it to be associated with concepts such as new, true, or even God. Therefore, this version of Godzilla represents all three at the same time. A reinvention of the character, a creature that reclaims his original function as a reflection of a real catastrophe, and an organism whose name, within the story itself, means the incarnation of God. Everything begins in Tokyo Bay, where the Coast Guard finds Professor Goro Maki's small yacht completely abandoned. Shortly afterwards, an enormous disturbance destroys part of the Aqualine tunnel, and a reddish substance begins flooding the area. The authorities consider geological explanations for the phenomenon, but Rando Yaguchi suspects that a gigantic creature is moving beneath the water. His theory appears absurd until a tail emerges in front of the cameras. This brings us back to Goro Maki, a Japanese zoologist who had studied the effects of radioactive contamination in the ocean. After losing his wife to a radiation-related illness and leaving Japan, he eventually began working for an American energy company. During his research, he discovered a prehistoric marine life form that had survived in the depths and had spent decades feeding on nuclear waste dumped into the ocean during the 1950s. This is important because it contradicts an explanation frequently repeated online. Shin Godzilla did not emerge from an amalgamation of microorganisms that fuse together to form a single body, at least not according to the movie and its official materials. His origin lies in an ancient marine organism that, after consuming that waste, developed the ability to withstand radiation, harness it as a source of energy, and alter its own anatomy. There is also a rather sinister theory proposing that Goro Maki did not actually die, but instead allowed himself to be absorbed by this microorganism in order to become Godzilla. Fans base this idea on the fact that his body was never found, the mysterious head on the tail, and above all, the humanoid creatures representing the monster's next evolution. According to this interpretation, Maki would have introduced the microorganism into his own body, partially transforming himself into the creature and using the monster as a form of revenge against humanity. However, this has never been confirmed, and the movie establishes that Godzilla already existed before Maki disappeared. Therefore, rather than being Shin Godzilla himself, perhaps Maki simply understood what the creature could become and decided to help unleash it. It is also clear that Maki did not create Godzilla through experiments. He discovered him, studied him, and left behind encoded information that would later allow others to understand him. The name he chose for the creature was Gojira, a word from his native island of Odo that meant something similar to the incarnation of God. The United States Department of Energy adapted that name in the Godzilla, but kept Maki's discoveries hidden. Therefore, when the organism finally appears, Japan is not only confronting this unknown monster, it is also confronting the consequences left behind by that abandoned waste, the information withheld by the United States, and the warnings no one wanted to hear. Godzilla's first form is never shown in its entirety. We only see part of his back and his enormous tail moving across the surface of the bay. This means that any complete reconstruction of his body comes from designs or later interpretations, not from anything clearly revealed in the movie. The only certainty is that he is still a semi-aquatic form, better suited to living underwater and incapable of moving properly on land. However, that limitation does not last long. When the creature enters a canal and approaches the Kamada district, his body develops hind limbs capable of pushing him out of the water. This is how his second form appears, giving us one of the strangest images in the entire franchise. His body remains almost parallel to the ground, moving like a marine animal that still does not understand how to support its own weight. He has pale, sickly skin, a head resembling that of a frilled shark, enormous expressionless eyes, and two small stumps where his arms will eventually grow. On the sides of his neck, he retains open gills that release large amounts of blood as he moves. His hind legs can propel him forward, but they have not yet been integrated into a truly terrestrial anatomy. For this reason, he drags himself forward awkwardly while his tail pushes vehicles, boats, and buildings aside. At this point, he does not appear to be hunting or searching for anything in particular. In fact, he barely reacts to the humans fleeing around him. The destruction he causes primarily results from his size, his disorientation, and the new body he is attempting to control in an environment to which he has not yet adapted. The movie never confirms that Godzilla experiences pain as a person or animal would, but from the blood he sheds, his desperate movements, and the violence of his mutations, we can infer that every transformation is an extremely traumatic and painful process. While the Japanese authorities continue deciding how to respond, the creature changes again. His spine straightens, his hind legs grow stronger, his arms begin taking shape, and his gills become less important. This third form can already walk on two legs and comes much closer to Godzilla's traditional silhouette, although he still retains a long neck, reddish skin, and rather unstable balance. The problem now is his body temperature. The nuclear reaction keeping Godzilla alive produces an amount of heat that his terrestrial organism does not yet know how to dissipate. The reddish areas of his body appear to burn from within, while his dorsal plates release some of that energy as heat. Unable to cool himself properly, he eventually returns to the ocean. This initial journey establishes Shin Godzilla's defining quality. It shows us that his evolution does not occur across generations, as it does with real animals, but within the same individual and in real time. The organism detects a physiological limitation and reorganizes its body to overcome it. However, we do not know how much conscious control he possesses over this process, so it would be unwise to describe every change as a strategic decision made by his organism. Nevertheless, the result is the same. Any weakness that fails to kill him may disappear in his next form. Meanwhile, as Godzilla remains hidden in the ocean, his body completes its adaptation to life on land without overheating. When he emerges again near Kamakura, he is already 389 feet tall and has reached his fourth form. His legs can now support the full weight of his body, his cooling system functions without needing to return to the ocean, and his skin has become an almost impenetrable armor. This silhouette finally resembles the classic Godzilla, although observing it up close produces the opposite impression. His black skin is covered in scars and reddish cracks that reveal the heat and tissue beneath the surface. His sternum protrudes from his chest, his arms are small and atrophied, and his mouth has no lips, leaving several rows of crooked teeth exposed as they grow without any discernible order. When he uses his primary attack, his upper jaw rises while his lower jaw splits apart to widen the opening through which the energy is released. His tiny eyes do not have normal eyelids either, but rather protective membranes that cover them against explosions and the glare of his own attacks. His tail is even longer than his body and ends in a structure composed of bones, teeth, and a kind of secondary head. It is not simply an appendage used to maintain balance. In this version of the kaiju, it is another sensory and offensive platform, capable of moving above Godzilla and later emitting its own beam. When the Japan Self-Defense Forces unleashed helicopters, tanks, and artillery against him, Godzilla barely responds or reacts. He simply continues walking as though the projectiles have no effect on him. This reinforces the idea that the creature did not actually come to Tokyo to wage war against humanity. Until that moment, humans are little more than an insignificant part of the environment. However, the situation changes when American bombers launch penetrator bombs at his back. These bombs pierce his armored skin and tear away part of a dorsal plate, causing Godzilla to bleed. This is the first time a human weapon manages to truly injure him, and his reaction completely transforms the scale of the movie. His body begins to glow. First, he expels a black cloud filled with radiation from his mouth. He then ignites it, generating a stream of fire that covers the streets. Finally, all that energy becomes concentrated into an extremely thin purple beam, capable of cutting through buildings from enormous distances. At the same time, Godzilla projects multiple beams from the plates on his back and destroys the bombers attacking him from above. His organism also possesses something resembling a biological radar, allowing him to detect threats outside his field of vision. Later, he also channels the beam through the head, located at the tip of his tail. The movie never establishes with absolute clarity whether he created all these abilities at that moment or simply used them for the first time when he felt threatened. What is evident is that his anatomy can respond from practically any angle. For this reason, attacking his back is no longer a safe option. Despite this, such power comes at a price. After incinerating part of Tokyo and destroying his attackers, Godzilla exhausts his reserves and enters a state of suspended animation. He remains motionless for approximately 15 days while recovering his energy. This is one of his most important limitations. Although his evolution may appear infinite, every transformation and every energy discharge require resources. The greater the amount of energy released, the more vulnerable he becomes afterward. During this time, the government collects blood samples from the creature, and their analysis reveals something truly horrifying. Godzilla's cells can use elements found in the air and water to produce a radioactive isotope that sustains them. This means that he does not depend on a conventional food chain and could remain active almost anywhere on the planet. Furthermore, his body contains an extraordinary amount of genetic information and can modify it without waiting for a new generation to emerge. The scientists even consider the possibility that the creature could reproduce asexually and spread exponentially like an infection, reduce his size, or develop wings if he ever needed them. However, these possibilities are only hypotheses expressed by characters confronting an organism they still do not understand. They are not transformations the movie confirms he will complete. The more immediate threat is that fragments separated from his body could continue regenerating and eventually become independent organisms. If every piece could acquire a life of its own, destroying Godzilla with explosives would only help disperse him. Precisely because of this risk, the United States and the United Nations decide that the creature must be eliminated with a thermonuclear bomb, even if that means once again destroying a Japanese city with a nuclear weapon. Here, the movie returns to its central idea. Humans created the problem through pollution, worsened it by hiding information, and now intend to solve it by repeating the same kind of destruction that gave rise to Godzilla. A little ironic, if you ask me. For this reason, Yaguchi and his team propose an alternative. Maki's encoded documents reveal that the creature's blood forms part of the system cooling his biological reactor. If they can introduce enough coagulant, they could block that circulation and force the organism to stop its nuclear reaction to prevent an internal collapse. This is how Operation Yashiori begins. First, they use trains loaded with explosives to awaken Godzilla. They then send waves of drones, forcing him to expend his energy reserves by firing from his back, mouth, and tail. When his attacks begin to weaken, they bring several buildings down on top of him and use concrete pump trucks to introduce the coagulant directly into his mouth. Godzilla manages to rise and destroys part of the equipment, but a second offensive delivers the complete dose. His organism responds by shutting down its internal reaction and drastically reducing his temperature, finally leaving Godzilla frozen in the middle of Tokyo. It is important to note that he is not actually dead, but suspended in a dormant state. The nuclear attack is therefore postponed, although it is established that it will resume if the creature begins moving again. Humanity does not achieve a definitive victory against the kaiju. All it gains is time. Then comes the final image. The camera slowly moves along the motionless tail and reveals several humanoid figures trapped while attempting to emerge from it. The official book, The Art of Shin Godzilla, identifies these creatures as the fifth form, but the movie never explains exactly how they would have functioned. They are thin, skeletal beings with small dorsal plates, claws, sharp teeth, and split skulls. They do not possess clearly developed eyes, and some have cavities in their heads and torsos. They appear to be separating through a form of fission, as though Godzilla's gigantic body had begun transforming into a colony of smaller organisms, just as the scientists had theorized. For this reason, the most widespread interpretation is that Godzilla was adapting to his primary enemy. A 389-foot-tall body can withstand tanks and missiles, but it is also slow, visible, and requires enormous amounts of energy. By contrast, hundreds or thousands of creatures with human-like forms could disperse, enter buildings, and become much more difficult to locate. Even so, the movie does not confirm that they were conscious creatures, that they shared a hive mind, or that they had any clear objective against humanity beyond spreading. All of this is a reasonable deduction based on their appearance and the surrounding context, but it remains only a theory. Even so, the discarded material helps explain why that possibility was so concerning. Among the unused special effects footage is a sequence in which a reconnaissance team examines the fragments torn from Godzilla's back by the bombers. Instead of finding dead tissue, they discover masses of flesh covered in eyes and teeth that appear to react to their surroundings. The scene resembles the uncontrolled biology of John Carpenter's The Thing more than a traditional Godzilla movie. It also directly visualizes what the scientists fear throughout the story, that every fragment remains active and begins constructing the structures necessary to become a new creature. Other deleted materials showed the third form expelling a bodily fluid so hot that it melted the tires of nearby vehicles. Something similar happens with Shin Godzilla's famous 8 forms. Numerous videos claim that the humanoids would be followed by a 6th stage capable of living without air or water, a 7th containing an entire universe within its body, and an 8th in which Godzilla would transcend the laws of physics to become an omnipotent entity similar to Azathoth. Once again, none of this is part of the movie, its final screenplay, or any official evolutionary sequence established by the art of Shin Godzilla. The production materials do contain alternative designs, discarded ideas, and different possibilities for the monster's mutation. The movie itself also mentions hypothetical scenarios such as asexual reproduction or the development of wings. However, combining those possibilities with concepts created by fans and presenting them as the 6th, 7th, and 8th forms turns speculation into false information. The curious thing is that Shin Godzilla does not need any of these other transformations to be terrifying. What we see is already enough. He is a creature capable of transforming useless gills into a terrestrial respiratory system, turning an injury into a new form of defense, and replacing a single gigantic body with a potential population of independent beings. Every failed attempt to destroy him selects the version that will survive the next attack. In the end, Operation Yashiori managed to freeze that process only moments before it was completed. However, the creature remains there, at the center of a city that must now be rebuilt around him. If he awakens, the nuclear countdown will begin again. If he manages to adapt to the coagulant, the strategy that worked once will no longer be effective. And if those figures manage to separate themselves from his tail, humanity will no longer have to face a single Godzilla. It will have to face an entire species. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.